Good morning. Thanks for joining us for Learning Lab's webinar on digital accessibility for online learning. I'm Lark Park. I am the director of the California Education Learning Lab. And with me are Marisa Chung and Rob Charette, who are program development officers for the Learning Lab. We invited three guests from UCLA's Disabilities and Computing Program under their Office of Information Technology to spend time with us today on this webinar. We're hosting this as a grantees-only webinar to cover some of the basics of accessibility and digital accessibility and best practices. And importantly, we wanted to have these experts available so you could take the opportunity to ask some specific questions on the end, at the end related to your projects. Some of you are in the home stretch of your grant and others are just starting out, but we thought this would be valuable for all, especially as many of you who are approaching the end of your grant period are thinking about opportunities for scaling your work. We know this isn't new thinking for you. During the proposal stage, many of you were asked to describe your plan for ensuring access for students with disabilities compliant with your institution's policies. So we know that many of you have taken this into consideration and account. But with so many advances and changes in technology, just being current may not be the easiest thing to do. So we invited our guests to have a refreshed and reinvigorated discussion on accessibility. So our webinar is scheduled to go until 12:45 p.m. and there will be time for questions at the end. We are recording this and we plan to post the recording on our grantee portal page as well as our public site. So if you want to forward to your colleagues, they can access it. And so it's my pleasure to welcome our three guests from the Disabilities and Computing Program. They are Travis Lee, Sal Santa Ana, and Carolanne Link, and each of them will introduce themselves in more depth, and I will turn it over to Travis to get us started.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lark. And today you're going to be learning about digital accessibility in online education, and we've kind of broken it down into two major sections: the disabled experience of students with disabilities on our campuses, and the culture around that. And the second half is going to focus on the technical skills and the definitions of accessibility itself. So we'll just hop right into it. Okay, so all right. Okay, so my name is Travis Lee. I'm the Disabilities and Computing Program Coordinator at UCLA. That pretty much means that our department oversees UCLA for digital accessibility to ensure people with disabilities are able to use our digital learning environments, such as the LMS, our websites, public websites, mobile apps, web applications, even kiosks, so some physical space things as well. And I identify as someone with a disability. I have a reading disability called dyslexia that impacts about 10% of the population, and that has informed my life and my career in this space. I'm going to pass it now to Sal, who's going to talk a little bit about himself.
Hi, my name is Sal Santa Ana, Web Accessibility Specialist and lead tester here at the DCP. I have low vision, so that means I use a screen reader and screen magnifier when I use a computer. And with all that, I'll pass it to Carolanne.
Hello, I'm Carolanne Link. I am the UCLA Web Accessibility Initiative Project Manager. I oversee, of course, the project, but also I love the fact that I also oversee a team of about 14 undergraduate students who do different remediation and accessibility work. On a personal note, I am a wheelchair user with a congenital mobility disability. All right. Travis, do you want me to share a screen? I believe I'm the first section.
Okay.
Or do you want to do agenda?
Quick learning objectives today.
Okay.
We're gonna start with Carolanne for the first 20 minutes or so. She's gonna talk about the different models of disability, the individual in disability culture, the classroom for those with disabilities. Then I'm gonna move into my section, which is gonna talk about the laws around disability, why we are even doing this from a legal perspective. I'm quickly touch on accommodations versus accessibility, so you kind of know what your role is as a faculty member. I'm going to describe the unique challenges that students with disabilities face in online education. Then we're going to jump over to Sal, who's going to do a screen reader demo. So you're really aware of what the technology sounds like to someone who might have a disability. And we're going to end with an exercise with the 5 major principles of digital accessibility that I think that you guys, kind of the basics, what is the intro level accessibility things that you should be aware of, and then you can implement on a day-to-day basis, both in your documents as well as in the HTML environment, such as the LMS. And hopefully we'll have enough time to work together to build the accessible Word document and export the PDF. But if we don't have time, you're gonna be able to see the 5 major principles applied in at least through the slideshow. So I'm gonna pass it now to Carolanne. I'm gonna stop my share, and she's gonna drive for the next few minutes on disability culture.
Awesome. Can I get a thumbs up from the audience? Just make sure the screen share is all working. Awesome. Fantastic. All right. So whenever we talk about digital accessibility, we like to lay the groundwork of what digital culture looks like in our society, both on a infrastructure and on an individual level. It helps just get the fundamentals of who we're serving. We've seen oftentimes that when we focus too much on just compliance, just hitting certain standards, we forget the human aspect of this. So we like to start off with this kind of topic. So first, we introduce the disability models. The first that's most common is called the medical model. It really focuses on the problem being with the individual, on what the diagnosis is, what their limitations are. Things are often framed in the negative of, oh, they can't do this, oh, they shouldn't do this, oh, it's a sad that they cannot, etc. This idea of diminished quality of life as being a disabled person, really focus on that negative. On the opposite end, we have the social model, which more looks at the concept that people are diverse by default, and then it's really so the societal obligation to be accepting and accommodating of diverse peoples in all respects. So instead of looking at the person as the problem, it looks at the idea of how we are not accommodating individuals as the problem. So it focuses on inclusion and the fact that these lives are different, but not less than or worse quality than. And we take this idea as it's a collective responsibility to adapt, not just that one disabled person's responsibility to fight for everything they need all the time. So as I just said, here's some summary on that. Again, the medical model talks about the individual, focuses on the negative and what they're missing out on. The social model focuses on this collective responsibility and the positive aspects of inclusivity. There are a lot of other models of disability that we won't touch on today because unfortunately we didn't have the time to go that in depth, but these are the two big ones and the most common ways to think about it and the most diametrically opposed. So moving away from the society, let's look at disability culture on the individual level. This is one of my favorite topics personally. So I first start off with this concept of here we have someone with corrective lenses or contacts, and then we also have the idea of food allergies. But why are these medical conditions seen as medical conditions, yet someone using a wheelchair is seen as a disability? In reality, all of these things are actually just a medical condition that affects how you approach your day-to-day life. And all of them have spectrums. Some people have glasses for very minor or specific instances. Some need glasses to function every second of their lives. Some people have food allergies, which are very small and a little discomfort, and some can be life-threatening. And that's the same with all different types of disabilities. So the short answer to this question of how these are different is just normalization. We were talking about that idea of the societal model. The difference is not the fact that they're different in how they're medically relevant, and it's just on how society views them and accommodates them. It's very normal and easy for someone to go to an optometrist and get glasses, but it is not normal and easy for someone to get fitted and pay for a wheelchair, for example. So it just reminds us to reframe how we think about disability as not so ostracized, not so different. It's just something that we need to normalize a little bit more. So the way I think about disability, especially as we enter higher education, is these 4 axes: duration, mentality, environmental, and situational. So duration is the concept of how long someone has had this disability. It can be recently acquired, it can be congenital. Mentality is usually tightly related to that. It's the idea of how comfortable are they with that identity, with the accommodations they have. Do they know what to ask for themselves? How comfortable are they? Usually those are pretty in line, but sometimes they're not, and that's a good thing to recognize. You may have someone who has had a lifelong disability, but maybe they are in situations that make them more uncomfortable or have lessened their mental confidence. Environmental. Of course, this is the idea of when you are in different environments, you have different barriers. You may be at home that has a lot of accommodations for you and you've tweaked to make very accommodating for you, but maybe you've gone out to any public space that has major barriers for you. And lastly, I think this is one that people tend to overlook, but in my opinion, the most important, situational, especially in education. The idea that disabilities aren't static. It's not a one size fits all, and it's not even consistent. It can be inconsistent from day to day or even hour to hour. I think this is really important to bring up because I've seen a lot of disabilities in my life that have manifestations of and flare-ups in their disability during times of severe stress. So that could be a midterm or a final, and therefore extra understanding needs to be during these times of more difficult emotional status and stresses as well. So to bring this on a more personal level, this is my set of axes when I started my undergraduate journey at UCLA. My duration was lifelong. I have congenital cerebral palsy. My mentality was moderate. So even though I had had it for my entire life, I'd accepted it because I didn't know anything different, but I was really insecure about how I presented myself. Of course, that's part of just growing up and becoming an adult and being in a new place. But I do notice that discrepancy between that lack of confidence I faced. Additionally, the environment changed hugely for me. Throughout my childhood, my parents were very specific about the environments I was in, so I would never actually notice that much about how the wear and tear was affecting my body. But being independent and at UCLA, which is a very hilly campus, I had a lot of fatigue, my body started to deteriorate, and it was actually, there were some big physical problems that I wasn't expecting that I started to face as soon as I moved to LA on my own. And lastly, my situational was moderate. I did have some flare-ups in more difficult situations, which were actually able to manage later on in my undergraduate career with a medically reduced course load and some lovely accommodations from professors and our disability services department. But this just gives you an idea of how different each disabled person's experience can be and what they need to get to be successful. Next, I like to bring up these two juxtaposed pictures of myself. I think this is a really important commentary about disability and stereotypes. I like to say that these two pictures are both me every day. I'm what I like to refer to as a semi-ambulatory disabled person or wheelchair user. And that means that I can stand to a certain extent. I can even walk short distances. But the thing is when I use my wheelchair, a lot of people make the assumption that I have no leg function. I've even had moments where someone has met me in my wheelchair and then seen me be ambulatory later on and accused me of faking, of exaggerating my disability. And of course, when someone is coming into their disability, that can be extremely hurtful, especially in a new environment like starting university. So I like to use these to remind people that disabilities are A, very personal, B, non-static, and C, they can change throughout people's lives, with all these different stressors we just talked about. But it's important to remember that sometimes we make these snap judgments based on our own schemas and biases, but that they're not necessarily true. And it's better to get to know people on a more personal level and be able to talk to them instead of making judgments, and especially accusations. Again, to emphasize that, I have Think Before You Judge. This is US Paralympian Jessica Long. She's a very amazing American swimmer. She was just at Tokyo and won medals there. She was a featured campaign in the Toyota Living Your Best Life. But even her, she talks about the fact that as a double amputee, people will see her parking in a disabled parking spot and heckle her and berate her for using that spot. Because of course, through her car window, they cannot tell that she's a double amputee. And even when they see her prosthetic legs, people make assumptions about the fact that, oh, well, she has these legs, so she doesn't need this spot. She doesn't need that convenience. Not understanding that prosthetic legs can be very uncomfortable. They can have, they can have nerve problems, etc., that can make the usage very difficult as well. So this, again, emphasizing this idea of making sure our judgments are not assumptions and making sure that we're respectful in how we interact with individuals, especially when we don't understand their disabilities. So a commentary on this a little bit larger is this concept of internal struggle, burden versus entitlement. And I really like to emphasize this because it helps us in how allies and people interacting with the disabled community can conceptualize different needs. So on one end of the spectrum, we have burden. We have disabled people who are afraid to be an inconvenience. They don't want to bother. They're afraid that they will be resented or mistreated. I've often heard from students the idea of they're afraid they'll get graded down if they are too bothersome about accommodations and what they need. And so in addition to having this fear of missing out, especially in social situations, the fear of being a burden. I know as an undergrad, I didn't go to almost any extracurriculars for a very long time because I was afraid I'd show up in my wheelchair and there'd be no accommodations for me, and I didn't want to make a scene. And that alone was enough fear for me to not get involved in things I wish I should have. On the other end of the spectrum, there's entitlement. There are people who feel that society owes it to them to be very accommodating, to give them everything they need. They feel very righteous and justified in this. Sometimes it's even accompanied with anger. And this can be very common with people who are newly disabled and feel that their injury, it comes with this psychological factor of unjust, etc., and anger at the situation and the world. But I bring up these two things because they have very different effects on their requests and how they interact with people. So for example, on the burden end of the spectrum, it's important to look out for students and any person, in fact, that may not be asking for help enough, who may be too afraid to ask for help and may go out of your way to offer it for them because they may really want it and just too afraid to ask. On the entitlement end of the spectrum, it's important to remember that their anger and maybe their demands is not a reflection on your actions, but is a reflection on how they're still processing these feelings. And doing your best with what you can offer them is sometimes all you can do. And sometimes their dismay at that is, again, not a reflection on you. But it's important to remember both so you're not dissuaded from either extreme. Of course, the majority of disabled people fall somewhere in the middle, and it can, of course, change situation to situation. But it's good to think about that and remind yourself of that as you progress. So I'm going to bring these concepts into the classroom now. So to build off of the burden versus entitlement, we will start with this situation, which is a personal one from very early on in my undergraduate career, where I had a final paper due, an elective that I was taking, and it was instructed that we had to turn a hard copy into the TA's office. Normally, to get to my class, I used the disabilities van, which was a service offered by Disabled Services, to get to my different classes, but I couldn't get it for whatever reason that day to drop it off at the TA's office. So I requested via email to my professor an impromptu accommodation to let me turn in my paper digitally. And this is a quote from the response that I got all those years ago. And it says, "Sorry, I require hard copies so that our TAs can grade them without having to spend their own money to print your papers for you. The non-accommodating CAE, which was our disabled student service, van service sounds like an issue for student government to bring up with the administration." And my takeaway for this little 17-year-old me, takeaway from this was I was at fault for asking. And I actually didn't ask for accommodations from my professors for years after this because I internalized this so much and was so horrified that I was afraid to continue. I thought, oh my gosh, maybe he's not going to like me. Maybe I'm going to get a lower grade because I did this. I was lucky enough that I had a friend who was able to walk my paper over for me, so it worked out. But it's just so important to realize that even just these two sentences resonated with me for years. And here I am talking to you all about it, even all these years later, because that's how impactful it was. So even something like this, and this attitude of not my problem, trying to hand it off to somebody else, even just not a simple kindness in this quote, would have changed how I felt. So it really made me, and the big takeaway for me was it made me feel like maybe academia wasn't a place I could succeed. Maybe it wasn't made for me. And I hate the concept that any student ever feels that way. So it's great to take this in stride and kind of see how we can do better. So some best practices to pull out of how we communicate and the etiquette in interacting with disabled people, as we've already touched on, is that they're not always static. They can change, what they need may change. And building off of that is the idea that it can be difficult to talk about, especially when they're newly diagnosed. They may have a lot of feelings go on. They may not have the terminology to even ask for what they need. And therefore, it may be a learning process. And I know sometimes that can be frustrating on both sides for the student and the person trying to provide accommodations or help. But sometimes they just don't have the words yet. So it's definitely a learning experience. Third, as I just demonstrated with my own example, sometimes they're afraid to ask for help. Maybe they had a mean professor in the past, or maybe they had a bad experience. Maybe they have a lot of internalized ableism at home or just within themselves. So sometimes they need a little bit of coaxing and offerings of help. And this last one I see in the classroom quite a bit is don't out a student. And it happens indirectly a lot, especially with learning and invisible disabilities. I'll see a professor go, hey, can so-and-so please stay after class? And then maybe their friends will wait up for them and go, oh, what did the professor want to talk to you about? And maybe they haven't talked about it with their friends yet. Maybe they're not ready for that. So it's really good to, if you do want to talk about this issue with them, to make it private and make sure that they're comfortable and don't accidentally put them in a situation which may make them uncomfortable, especially with other people. Another thing for higher ed specifically is this is really common. We see syllabus disclaimers on where to go for disability accommodations at a different office. And I like to point out that this is not enough. The key thing in education, at least in my experience, has always been feeling really comfortable in the classroom and with whoever you're directly interacting with, it being an instructor, a teacher, a TA, whoever it is, and making sure that they feel comfortable interacting with you. And this is important because you can even just starting your first class with, I really want you all to succeed. Please feel free to talk to me about anything you think may be a barrier to education. Really general, it doesn't even have to be disability related. I see that this hugely impacts how students interact with their instructors. But in addition, we see a huge impact lifted on the fact that a lot of students wait till their first problem to bring up a disability or a barrier, and you don't want to be dealing with this the day before a midterm or the day before a big test or project. It's so great to start these conversations early so you can start brainstorming even preventative ideas. So it takes that burden off of both of you in last minute accommodations. So the natural next question I tend to get is, what am I allowed to say in these conversations? How do I approach this well? And I have two main bullet points. First one is don't ask about disability directly. This goes back to what we were saying about the disability models. It doesn't really matter what the medical diagnosis is or what the specifics of their condition are. It's really conversation around reducing the barriers. How can I help? What can I offer you? What do you think a good solution is? I also recommend the idea of asking open-ended questions. Would you like to discuss the midterm and upcoming project? Because this lets them drive the conversation. If they're struggling with their identity and they're struggling with how to ask, or if they're going to be a burden, giving an open-ended conversation, letting them drive it helps them process and feel more comfortable in those conversations. The second one tends to surprise people, and this is more of a personal point of preference, is I don't think people should be afraid of using the wrong terms or phrases. I think there's a couple of general welcome phrases like person with disabilities. Personally, I identify with the phrase disabled person because I feel disability is a core part of my identity, but it's a really personal conversation. But if you're really not sure, you can always ask what terminology someone prefers. We're getting really good in society right now about asking people their preferred gender pronouns when you're getting to know them, so you know how to respectfully address them. And that's a good way to go about disabled terminology as well if you're ever not sure. All right, and now I will hand it off to Travis to talk about more specifics of digital accessibility, the laws, and all of our technical fun.
All right, thank you so much, Carolanne. All right, so I'm gonna all right. All right, so now we're in the section of digital accessibility, which is much more specific to the digital environments. So what is digital accessibility? I get that question a lot, and I try to describe my job to people. People don't know what I do. This is what digital accessibility is. Digital accessibility is a relationship between these two people. On one side, you have the end user, and oftentimes it's, in our case, it's the student, and that person may have a disability. In this case, the student is likely blind. She's using some assistive technology to access her material. This technology is usually kind of expensive, but usually pretty decent. Students who get into college are usually pretty comfortable with their technologies. They are also accommodated, or sometimes they're able to purchase these tools through their disabilities office. So they have grants, so some of the technology they can actually pick up from the school. But on the other side is the developer. That's all of us. So a B over here, this is all of us. Everyone who puts content on the internet is responsible, is this person over here, right? Whether you're a web developer, you're a faculty, you're just a student at the front of the office who needs to update some content on a website or upload some documents to a website, that's this person over here. This person over here is all of us. And our job is to remove the obstacles from allowing her technology from working. That's pretty much it. That's what accessibility is. Accessibility is removing the obstacles from someone with a disability from allowing their technology from working. And generally it's, some of it's pretty straightforward, especially now within LMSs, they've put up a lot of guardrails, but sometimes it can get more complicated with accessible menus and accordions and things like that. But generally, with this group, we're talking LMS accessibility, basic HTML accessibility, document accessibility. And your job is to remove the obstacles. That's what accessibility is, the relationship between these two individuals. Digital accessibility is guided by a few laws, one of them being the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. So you might have an ADA office at your workplace. This is kind of the umbrella law for all of the disability laws. This is kind of the same as the civil rights law of 1964, which is basically saying that people with disabilities are should have equal access to jobs, education, to employment, to even private, to buildings and like shops and things like of that nature. So it's a very high level law that, but doesn't get very specific, because at this time in 1990, the internet was very new and we didn't have a lot of guidance. This was, people think of the ADA, they generally think more physical spaces. In the 90s, you might remember ramps being put in, elevator lifts being put in. So that all had to do with the ADA. But more specifically, there's laws that guide information technology, like websites and learning management systems and mobile apps. And that's something called the 508, which is a sub-law of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. With this law saying any organization receiving federal funding needs to be accessible, according to the 508. And the 508 does give guidance on how to be accessible. What does it mean to be accessible? As well as the 504, which is a disability law that which says that students with disabilities should have equal access to education. So these are two major laws guiding us. And these are things that the universities get in trouble for as well when they create inaccessible material. And that's part of my job, is to work with the university to make sure that we are legally protected, but also making sure that our students are being serviced and having accessible environments to learn. The guidelines for digital accessibility is something called the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. For most of us who are in California and within the UC system, is something called the WCAG 2.0 AA. It's currently in version 2.2 right now, but the AA standard is pretty universal in higher education. And if you ever are curious if something's accessible or not, you could go to this website, the WCAG website, and you could actually look it up. So this is something that I always say, oh, this is the Bible for the people who are in this space, because when you're not sure of what is true or not true, you go to the WCAG and you look for the success criteria, whether or not it's accessible. And it's broken down to 4 major principles. I'm not going to go super deep into it because I think that I just want you to know there's standards. There's a measuring stick. There's an actual quantitative way to measure accessibility. And that's, but the major principles are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Those are the guiding principles of the WCAG. And it's more important that you know that it exists. And what you do in your jobs is going to be very different than my job has a lot to do with the WCAG, but what I want faculty to be aware of is really some basic principles, and for you to think about all students, not just the typical ones, in your work. I think that's more important than learning the technical success criteria of the WCAG. So I want to touch on the accommodations versus accessibility models within higher education. And I think that we very much leaned into the accommodations model for a very long time. So what is the accommodations model? So versus the accessibility model. So we have, I guess it kind of goes back to like the medical model versus the social model of disability. So here we see, this is what's an accommodation. So you're having an event at a building on your campus. That building doesn't have a wheelchair ramp for whatever reason. Maybe it was built in the 1800s. And you know that there's someone, you're like, oh, someone registered for the event and they identify themselves as a chair user. And you're like, oh, okay, well, let me go buy this temporary wheelchair ramp, put it on, and then use it for this one time. And that's what's called an accommodation. It's reactive. it's personalized to the individual with a disability. It can be stigmatizing because like you're getting it's obvious, it's kind of special treatment. It's whereas and it could be expensive as well. So in my mind, I think about captions, for example. This is one accommodation that exists in higher education. If you need captions, sometimes what they'll do is they'll bring a captioner to the event, to the lecture, and the captioner will caption for that individual, and that individual will have the caption file. But that caption file is not available to the rest of the class, and it's not embedded within the LMS. It just lives with that student, right? Same thing with, I remember another example was a Braille math book that they brailled an entire math book for a blind student, but that was like $40,000 to do that brailing. And then that student has that textbook, but is not available to all the other students. So it could get expensive that way. So it's very individualized. Whereas accessibility is a proactive approach. I mean, building things accessibly is like, you're getting in front of the issues. It's universal design. It's really about being accessible to all people, not just people with disabilities, not just, and to the non-disabled people as well. It's going to be accessible. It's invisible to the non-disabled people because they're all using the same ramp. In this case, this ramp is inside of a building at Berkeley, and everyone uses this ramp, whether you have a disability or not. So it's invisible to the non-disabled population. It's also scalable, whereas like accommodations are not scalable. It's always, the more you accommodate, the more accommodations you have, the more individuals on staff you're going to need to accommodate those people. Whereas accessibility is getting in front of the issues, building things universally designed, and really looking at the disability as something that we all need to take care of. It's not an issue with the individual. It's something that we can all be better at being more inclusive of by building environments, building websites, building documents, building like buildings in such a way that is accessible to all people. So that's the difference between accommodations and accessibility. And I really encourage universities and almost any institute to embrace an accessibility model versus an accommodations model. It's more helpful, and I think it's a better legal strategy as well for protecting the university. Caroline, do you want to talk over this slide?
Sure, I can. So this is how we are looking at the problem of accommodations versus accessibility at our own university here at UCLA. So CAE, as I mentioned previously, is our Disability Services Department. And so noted is the fact that at the CAE, we currently have registration at about 4,000 students. However, CSIRO, which is our Student Affairs Information and Research Office, did an exit survey on students, which said 16% of students identified as having had or having a disability, which shows a factor of 2 times between the fact that only half students with disabilities were actually registered with disability services. Travis, can you activate animations? So why is that? We have the first reason is mainstreaming and stigma. Of course, people, as we touched on in the culture part, the idea that they are nervous about adding themselves, they are nervous about the treatment they'll receive, and then additionally, lack of an official diagnosis, access to adequate medical care, and specifically specialists in difficult to diagnose disabilities is not equal for everyone, of course. So sometimes it's just the fact that they don't have that piece of paper that says I officially have this disability. So those 2 things just show what this gap is, because a lot of people think, oh, the accommodations model works really well for our students that are registered with disabilities. But as we're saying, accessibility is proactive and therefore helps catch all these students, which in this case is as much as 4,000 students in our case, not slip through the cracks for other reasons.
All right, so I just want to give a few examples of digital accessibility and the types of tools that people with disabilities use. So we have some common accessibility features and issues. So we have screen readers for the blind and low vision, captions for the deaf and hard of hearing, keyboard only navigation. So there's a lot of people who don't use a mouse. They might have carpal tunnel, they might be missing a hand. So we use keyboard only navigation to ensure that they're able to use the website using keyboard only. Screen magnifiers for the low vision, making things sure things are scalable. Color contrast for the colorblind. Clickable area for mobility impairment, so making sure that buttons are big enough. reducing flashing elements for people with epilepsy, that can cause, like I remember recently reviewing a website that had a looping animation, and that's considered a fail for epilepsy. Cluttered pages for learning disability and anxiety disorders. Think about like how you, when you design your web pages in your LMS, making sure there's not clutter or overwhelming, you know, chunking up your material, learning objectives, readings, assignments, and doing that cleanly, that really helps people with disabilities as well. And real text, something called OCR, optical character recognized text for dyslexia. So dyslexia people also use, dyslexics also use screen readers, slightly different screen readers. But what's most important for people with dyslexia is making sure that it's real text. You might find PDFs that you can't highlight or search document. That's just an image PDF, image only PDF. And that's not good for people who are using screen readers. I also want to touch on some things that are specific to online education. This one was written in 2020 when we were still in, we're moving out of the pandemic. We're still in the pandemic, but this was some of the issues that students were facing during the pandemic as well. So isolation and loneliness. So 61% of our students were feeling isolated and lonely in online education. That is impactful for people with emotional disabilities or psychological disabilities. We have attention. We know that people in online courses, I mean, basically everyone on the internet is acting like they have like attention issues because we're flipping through all of our videos. I'm sure a lot of you guys are doing other things right now, but attention in online courses is an issue. We want to be able to make sure that we are building our courses in such a way that kind of keeps their attention, and be aware that there are attention issues in online courses. We have time management. This is a major issue in online courses because you're not checking in with the student as often through like discussion sections, whereas you know, in online courses, it's a lot of time management. It's up to the individual. This could be impactful for people with ADHD, learning disabilities, and depression. Inaccessible reading material for the visually impaired or reading disabilities. So like I said, the image-only PDF. This is a major issue at UCLA and almost all institutes of higher education is the lack of captions. We just don't have the budget to caption at what's called WCAG 2.0 AA level, which is 99% accuracy. We're using a lot of machine captions. I understand if you're doing that. It's better to have machine captions than no captions. We have a lot of, in the STEM, we have a lot of screenshots of graphs and tables without alt text or any explanation. That's also an issue in a lot of online courses. And non-descriptive links for low vision and blind. I'm going to go over that one, which is one of the best practices, principles I'm going to go over. Okay, so now we're going to do the screen reader demo with Sal.
Okay, I will share my screen and let's see. Okay.
Meeting controls win.
Okay. Sorry.
Office of Advanced Research.
I will do a quick
Toolbar.
demonstration of a screen reader demonstration.
Participants can now see your
while I show you what I look for when I test a website for accessibility. So a screen reader is based on speech-to-text technology, and for Windows screen readers, the most popular screen readers are NVDA and JAWS, and for Mac and iOS, it is VoiceOver, and for Android, it is called TalkBack. On mobile devices, screen readers are driven by touch gestures, and on the computer and laptop, it is driven by only the keyboard. So when I test the page for accessibility, the first thing I do is a tab test. So I'm going to press the tab key. This is also the primary way a screen reader user would go through all the links on the page. Okay.
Office of Advanced Research Computing document. Link previous link, resume link.
I will slow
Grade
the
17. Grade 12.
speech down.
Grade or jump to main content link.
So the jump to main content link is very important, and all websites should have this link.
UCLA Office of Advanced Research. Email us graphic link. Find us on LinkedIn graphic link.
So as you could hear, it tells me what the graphics are.
Search edit, enter the terms you wish to search for. Search button. Navigation landmark list clickable with 7 items about collapsed visited sub-menu link heading level 2.
So the primary thing is I test menus because on websites, not all menus are accessible. So I'm gonna attempt to pop this open with my down arrow key.
Heading level 2 collapsed heading level 2
or my spacebar. So I can
about welcome
tab through all these links.
mission
hopefully.
link expanded, leadership link advisory boards, org structure link, research tech, staff link expanded, visited.
So
about
I'm just
collapsed.
going to speed through this right now so I could show you the carousel below there.
Resume link.
So I'm going to press the spacebar to start this carousel.
Pause. Resume.
It's not moving. So it was. I'm going to refresh the page.
Office of Advanced Research Computing. Banner landmark. Click. Welcome to the office. List with 3 items. Next link. Mayor Garcetti partnering with Sesame.
So as you can as you can see, the carousel is moving.
UCLA.
There needs to be a way for a screen reader user to stop it. I'm just going to stop it with my mouse just because
welcome to the office of
to expedite the presentation. So yeah, all carousel should have a way to stop it.
Previous link. Banner list with resume next link.
So the next thing, normally I would just tab through all the links on the page just to see if I could reach them all. So all the clickable elements on the page. The next thing I'll do is pop open a window.
Elements list dialog.
And just check all the elements on the page. The first thing is links, like we're going over. All links on the page should make sense out of context because screen reader users would open this view and check what links are on the page and try to go to the link they want to go to directly.
UCLA Office of Advanced email us 4 of 31 level 0. Find us on LinkedIn 5 of 31. About collapsed visited submenu 6 of 31.
In this view, I would look for like ambiguous links like read more or click here. And I would take note if those exist because those don't make any sense in this view, right? I don't know what read more or where it goes.
Technology solution.
So I would have to click on that link and just read around or whatever just to see what that's about.
Consultants, collapsed sub.
The next thing I would check is headings.
Type.
Just to check if a page has heading structure.
From Yatsun. Tree view.
Ideally, a page should have one heading level 1.
About 2 of 9. Search form 1 of 9 level. About 2 of 9 level 0. Technology solutions 3 of 9 level 0. Consultants 4 of 9 level 0.
So now I'm going to close this.
Office of it from
check if the page has a heading level 1.
No previous heading at level 1. Welcome message from Vice Provost Jim Davis heading level from Carolanne link to everyone. NVDA is free for people. No previous heading at level 1.
So there's no heading level 1 on this page. I'm going to check if there's other headings.
Events visited link news heading level 2. View all events link heading level 2. No next heading.
Travis will go over this later, but page structure with headings is very important on a page. And the next thing I'll check for is graphics on the page.
Welcome to the Office of Advanced Research Computing, OARC, UCLA Advanced Research Computing graphic visited link.
So the only reason why I'm able to know that there's graphics on the page is because they have proper alt text associated with the graphics.
List with 4 items mobile app graphic link. A room with shelves of computer hardware graphic Hoffman 2 cluster link. Sesame E graphic link.
So yeah, alt text describes in a concise way what the image is.
No next graphic.
And then let's see, I'll just jump up to the top.
View all events link heading, events visited link news heading left.
The last thing I wanted to show you is that the screen reader could read the entire page to me if I wanted.
Heading level 2 visited link events visited link news. Mar. 22. Link Hoffman 2 happy hour. What is the Hoffman 2 cluster and what it can do for you? How to get an account link plus Q&A. Mar. 29. Link.
So yeah, that wraps up the screen reader demo. And now you know what a screen reader may sound like. There are additional voices available, but I like this robotic voice. So I'll pass it to the next.
Ellen Osmundson has left the meeting.
All right, thanks, Sal. I remember watching a screen reader demo back when I was a younger man in my early 30s. And I was an instructional designer at the time, building online courses. And this blind person was trying to get into the course. She couldn't even get into the course. And when she was in the course, like nothing was formatted correctly. And I, really felt disappointed, but also like shocked on how little I knew. And so I took a long time to try to figure out like what I didn't know as an instructional designer. And it led me to this career as I went into graduate school and I studied disabilities in online education. That was like actually where I focused on. And today here I am talking to you guys about making your courses more accessible. So it was that screen reader demo that was actually the impetus for me changing my own life and my own career. All right, so I'm gonna hop in back into the back into this. All right, so screen reader demo. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about the 5 major principles of HTML and LMS accessibility. This is what I think you guys should take away from this talk, are these 5 practices. And I think you guys will be a lot more accessible. And this goes for documents as well. So I think we'll have time to do the exercise where you guys could follow along with me. But I'm going to talk over these really quickly first. Okay, the first principle is using headings. So you saw Sal's screen reader. He pulled up a list of all the headings. It's a very practical way for people who have assistive technology to just navigate the page. Just as a sighted user, we don't read everything in the newspaper. We look for headers and we kind of skim down to where we want to read. Same thing for blind people. They want to know where the headers are. So it helps users organize in the sense as for the page organizational structure. Visually apparent headers are helpful for cognitive disabilities. I think that you should definitely make a visual change between H1 and H2 and H3. For screen readers, you can navigate using the page according to its headers. Screen readers can listen to the list of all the headings, as you saw with Sal's link, and screen readers can skip to the desired heading point depending where they want to start reading. It's always hierarchical. You always need to follow in H1. You can't skip from H1 to H3. You want to go H1 to H2 to H3. Anyone who's written a dissertation knows about this from building it in Word, your table of contents. The headers are really helpful for that as well. So that's headers. Always use your headers. There's going to be available in the LMS. It's going to be available in Microsoft Word and Google Docs in HTML. It's always going to be available. So use your headers instead of using bold and font size to indicate heading structure. All right, the next principle is write alt text. So anytime you use an image inside of a document or your website or on like an instructional page, you want to have a alt text, a brief description of what it is that, what if you were blind, what they should be seeing, what they would be seeing. So describe the image specifically. So I like to see like, okay, so be specific, but you don't need to be verbose, right? So if I imagine there's a picture of Joe Bruin at the Rose Bowl at the Stanford game, at Stanford football game, UCLA versus Stanford. You wouldn't put bear as the alt text. You would say Joe Bruin at the Rose Bowl, something like that. So be specific about what the image is of, and the more specific, the better. But keep it short. Sal likes to say, kind of think about a Twitter post, like 100 characters max. Sometimes you need to go longer, like super complex graphic, like you have a whole infographic. You should, if it's a whole infographic, I might just put a caption underneath describing what the infographic is of and reiterating the words that are in the graphic itself. So sometimes people do put images of text into a graphic, and that's not a best practice. But if you do that, try to repeat the text in the alt text or repeat the text in a caption underneath the image. So logos shouldn't have the organization. Logo, alt text should be the name of the organization. You don't need to say logo of it. You could just say the name of the organization when you have a logo in there. You don't need to start with image of or picture of. This is only for people who have vision disabilities anyway, so they're gonna know. So just say, you could just go directly into the description image without saying picture of. I used to put image of a lot. Now I know that's a mistake. Include text that's part of the image. Like I said, if there is text within the image, go ahead and repeat that text in the alt text as well. And you don't need to add alt text to decorative images. That's a little bit more advanced, but if you are in HTML and it's just to say a fancy line break with some flourishes in there, you could just put quote, quote, and that will tell the screen reader user, just ignore this. This is not relevant to the content of this page. So you don't need to add alt text all the time, but in general, use alt text every time. Okay, principle 3 is use tables for data. I see this once in a while inside the LMS, because you could put a table in there. And I see some faculty, they actually put like images, or they actually start doing like that 90s thing, which is right over here, through the smoking room. Back when I started college in the 90s, we still used a lot of tables for layout. It was the only way to get alignment right back in the day in HTML. Nowadays we have CMSs, we have scalable, like reactive design. We don't need to use tables for layout. So use tables for tabular data only. Use tables for what they were designed for, tabular data. You should ideally add the headers. What's most important is to actually use the tables for what they're designed to do. Don't use it for layout, use it for tabular data. So that's also a best practice in the LMS or in HTML, because I see this happening still. Okay, so descriptive links. All right, so Sal, when he was showing that screen reader demo, he showed you the list of all of the links that he could pull up using his screen reader. So let's just say you're a blind person and you're going to go to this website. I have a screenshot of this is a bus website. It's like, imagine if you're blind and you go to, okay, I want to just check out this schedule of buses in my city. And imagine if this is what all the links look like. Bus timetable, be good to know. Here, open a new window, 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 here. So that's here is the link, right? So it's like click here. Oftentimes I see click here or back to top, download, read more. These are all what's called ambiguous links, and they're not descriptive. And so it actually is really difficult for someone with this disability to be able to navigate that page. Oftentimes they'll just leave the page entirely if a bunch of links were just non-descriptive, because what they're gonna have to do is gonna test out every single one of those links and find out where it's going. So here's some examples. So click here to download our terms and conditions. You should probably change it to download our terms and conditions, just to be specific there. Go to this website for our master's course list. This website or web page is really not very descriptive. So ideally you want to say courses for 2019-2020 page has a full list of our master's courses. So you link the course, so you link where they're going to go. When they click that link, they should be going to the courses for 2019-2020. The last one is just more of a style thing, which is HTML and the LMS for that matter. This is probably a best practice, as well as documents. You don't want to put the whole URL like http://www imperial. What you want to do is just replace that whole URL with a descriptive link, with visit our open access site. So that's what descriptive links. We're going to do that together in a second. The last one is to use the checkers. So in this case, this is the Canvas checker, which is the class we taught about previously. But this is true for Moodle checker. This is true for the Blackboard checker. This is true for the Microsoft Word checker, as well as the PowerPoint checker. Just use the checkers. Like if you're not sure about what you're doing, even I use the checkers because we all working really fast oftentimes. We're not always thinking about accessibility. We're thinking about getting that content in, we're thinking about deadlines. Just use a checker. And even if you don't understand what the checker is saying all the time, try to fix the things that you do understand, and it'll give you a short description. So we have about a little less than 10 minutes. So I'm going to now move into the workshop piece. So if you're in front of your computer, go ahead and open up a blank Word document and follow along with me. We're going to build an accessible document using these principles that we just learned. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Go ahead and open up a Word document. Okay, so I'm going to share this. Okay, so I have a blank Word document. We're going to write an essay about UCLA, which is my home school. Oops. Sorry, can you see this? Okay, let's see. This is the wiki page for UCLA. Okay, so we're gonna start with that one. All right, so this is what I see oftentimes, UCLA. So this is the title of our document, right? So people doing this all the time. All right, so we're good to go. We have a title. This is not a title. This is considered regular normal text, right? With that's bold. So what you want to do is use these styles here. So I think a lot of you guys already do this because most of you have written long documents, but it's really helpful to use the headers, right? In this case, you could either use a title or the header. I like to use header H1 because I have an HTML background. So that's the way you do it. User H1, every document should have only one H1 ideally. And if you don't like the look, you can always modify it, make it bold, change the color a little bit. All right, so that's our new header. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and center this. So that's H1. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and grab some text out of here. All right, let's grab some text. Copying Wikipedia like a college student. Okay, here we go. And then now we want to do the next header, which is, in this case, in this article, it's history is H2. Maturity as a university is going to be H3. Recent history is also H3. Sexual harassment scandals is an H3 as well. And 2019 college admissions is the H3. Campus would be an H2. So let's go ahead and build out a couple of these. So with history is going to be H2. And the next one down is University. It's going to be H3. So it's underneath, it's a subheader to history. So it's H3, right? I'm going to actually change the look at this a little bit. So it looks a little different. Something else. Scenario, bold. Okay, maybe a little smaller. 10 point. So it looks smaller. So that would be, so now all of the H3s are going to look like this. This is not ideal, but it's visually different than the H1 and the H2, and that's what you want, right? So inside of history, let's go ahead and put some text into the history part. This is kind of history of UCLA. Put down here. Okay, so we have some history there, and we have. All right, so that's header structure. Basically, always build headers into all your documents, into your HTML, into your LMS site. Use your headers whenever possible. It's really the base level accessibility. And it's super easy too, right? You don't need to think too hard about that. Okay, the next thing is writing alt text. So let's go ahead and grab some alt text. We have this, some picture from the old times, copy image. We're going here. I'm gonna go over here, put it here. Put it here. Here's an oldie picture. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and close this, make it a little bit smaller. All right, so how do you build alt text? Like I was saying before, you format picture. In this case, this is in Microsoft Word format picture. And then inside here, you have layout and properties, and you find the alt text here, right? So that's in Word. In HTML, you could do it in code, and in the LMS, oftentimes it just asks you to do it in the first place. This is a bad alt text. This is the file name as the alt text. Don't do that. Just write an alt text. You don't need to worry about title in Word. Just write the description. In this case, students posing outside normal school 1887. That's a reasonable alt text. It's super short. It's just what it is. It's some students posing outside the normal school in 1887. You could also say students posing in front of a building. You could say students lined up. Just to describe what this image is of. I think it helps that it tells the date. It shows it's an old picture from 1887. So that's how you do alt text. That's very easy. Okay, and then we also have descriptive links. Okay, so this is like I was saying earlier. So let's just say we're like writing this Wikipedia article. Want to learn more, like about the new school, right? About the normal school, and you click here, and then you'd insert this. It would be horrible. Not horrible. This is like normalschool.edu. Okay, this is what's called an ambiguous link. This is what you don't want to do. So ideally, what you want to do is just highlight the link. I mean, highlight the name of where you're going. In this case, the Los Angeles Normal School. So you highlight this and you link this school.edu. And that's how you do descriptive linking. So just look for anything that's ambiguous, like click here, read more, download, replace it with a descriptive link. All right, that's how you do the descriptive linking. And then I'm going to show you how to do the checker. So use the checker by going over here to review. And then you could click check accessibility. So this is Microsoft Word. A lot of Microsoft products do have this accessibility checker. I know Canvas does, I know Moodle does. Just go ahead and click it. see what happens. Okay, so no accessibility issues found. Let me show you this. So we want to go over here. Let's just say we want to, we're about to publish. Okay, but we're about to publish this document. We ran the checker and we're like, oh, wait, there's something going on. There's an error. There's a missing alt text in picture 1. You can click it. And it kind of gives you a description of why you should fix it and how to fix it. And this is a good way to just check your own work. So in this case, we're going to paste this alt text back in here, and then we can go back to the accessibility checker. And now there's no accessibility issues. And you know your document is ready for export to PDF, or you want to upload it to the learning management system. I know a lot of people export to PDF. So let me just give you a couple pointers for PDF. So what you want to do is you want to use the create PDF button here, or save as PDF. You don't want to print to PDF, because printing to PDF will flatten this file. And you might give you a warning. This is going to say, oh, this is optimized for print. You want to always optimize for web, and that means save as PDF, because printing to PDF will remove all of our alt text. It's going to remove our header structure, and so always save as PDF. All right. So okay. So over here. Okay, so this is where that was our demonstration today. It's right at 12:36, so we'll have some time for questions and answers. But you learned a little bit about disability culture and the student experience. You saw a screen reader demo. You know the 5 major principles of accessibility in the LMS. And you now know how to design an accessible document, a very basic accessible document. And if you have any questions about digital accessibility, please feel free to email all 3 of us. This is the best email, is dcp@oark.ucla.edu to reach out to us. Here's our personal emails. And if you want to follow us on social, we have at UCLA DCP, we highlight student events, disability issues, try to get the word out about our trainings that are public trainings as well, and highlighting our students who are doing excellent work for us. We also have a Facebook page. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you guys today about digital accessibility, and I'll be hanging out for the next 10 minutes to answer questions that you may have.
Travis, you want people to type them in or just raise their hand?
You could just shout them out, or type them in if you want to type them in. So raise your hand if you have any questions, or just speak into the microphone. Okay, Yatsun Poon.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Could you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
All right, okay. Actually, some years ago, I'm a math teacher. I teach calculus a lot, and some years ago, I did have blind students in my class, and then I was struggling because in math we have lots of graphs, and we have to interpret graphs. We teach students to read graphs. Right now, in my project, I'm writing it. With my colleagues, we are writing ebooks with lots of graphs. But I could not write everything. You could. Does it mean that every time I have a graphs, I have to write a very long narrative?
No. Okay, so I see your issue there. This is a very common issue in STEM. We actually just did a presentation about data visualization and accessibility and how to best do it. I was at a conference yesterday also, and looking at new tools for mathematics for people who are blind, because we know there's limitation within LaTeX as well as MathML, but there's new ways that we're interpreting them. One of the ways that I saw them doing graphs or tactile graphs or one way, that's an accommodation though. It's clearly it's accommodation. You're not going to build tactile graphs for your textbook. That would be an accommodations thing. I would say that, do your best to kind of describe what the graph is of, but understand that if someone is fully blind and using your textbook, they're likely going to have to get an accommodation, and it's going to be based on their learning needs. Because there's some people who are blind know how to code and can even do LaTeX, But there's some people who are blind who are not as math or computer oriented, but they're going to need a tactile graph of it, and they kind of feel it. And I was just talking to someone recently, and they're trying to build a tool for blind people to actually either do like what's called haptic, where they do little vibrations, or like do audio, and the audio would go up as this graph goes up. So there's a lot of people thinking about this issue. Don't think that you're alone here. We're also struggling with it. But I think the best practice for you is be accessible as possible with the best practices we talked about. Be brief in your description, but understand that if there is someone who's blind, or they're going to likely need to get an accommodation to understand those more complex graphics.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Other questions while we have Travis and his team here? Kevin?
Hi, thank you again for your presentation. I was particularly curious about different kind of design patterns or components that are often used in websites. We looked at the carousel and tables, how both of those can be problematic. Are there other kind of common components that we should either avoid or are particularly good?
Yeah, like, I think carousels are a big one that even within UCLA, we're like totally into carousels, even though it's known to be an accessibility issue for a lot of people. I would say like really complex menus that have like 50 items underneath, or like have 5 tiers of navigation. Like you have an arrow that drops down to another arrow that drops down. That 3 tiers of navigation is also oftentimes very complex for people with disabilities to use or do keyboard only navigation on. What other things?
Pop-up modals.
Yeah, pop-up modals are a good one.
Right.
Accordions.
Maps.
Accordions can get tricky as well. And mapping is also
Yeah.
something that could get tricky to be accessible. Yeah, so accordion, complex menu, the modal, pop-up modals, that videos that start with audio or that automatically start, that's a no-no. Yeah, those are some examples of that are just to try to avoid in general on your websites and in your LMS.
Or be super selective.
Or be super selective.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, sometimes you need it.
Yeah.
Did you have another question, Yat-Sen-Poon?
I do. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You're the only one. So let's go with it.
No. Perhaps more on the policy level. I teach at UC Riverside. Of course, on my campus we have our, the student service center, and then they help with lots of students, and then they could also interpret the local policy. Now, working on this project, then I have to work with my colleagues from community colleges. Sometimes I'm not so sure whether my local policy typically would be, if not identical, 99% similar to the ones.
I can tell you it's probably not.
Colleges.
Like the community college one is going to be different than the UC Riverside one. I've actually worked with UC Riverside on the policy around accessibility. The UC system's policies around accessibility are going to be slightly different than the policies at the Cal State and the community college system. It really depends on, I guess, how often they got sued. Really, if they got sued a lot recently, their policy is going to be much stricter. Whereas if they haven't been sued for a while, it might be more laxed. But in my mind, I think we should follow the law, which is use the 508, which is a federal law, use the WCAG, which is accepted interpretation of the 508, and try to embrace the spirit of the ADA whenever possible. Like, we're trying to be inclusive as possible. And I'm pretty pragmatic about accessibility. I understand not everything's going to be fully accessible, but making these small individual choices on a regular basis makes a big difference. But most likely, I would just say, the community college one might be a little stricter than yours. So go with whatever of the 2 policies is stricter. You should go for the stricter standard. Yeah,
I am sure that my team and everyone in this room has good faith attempt to accommodate all our students and colleagues. But my problem is I do not know who's stricter in which way on which interpretation. So Yeah, I just want you to know that I have a bit of struggle when I work across not just campus, but systems. That scares me as a project PI.
Yeah, and I know that like the community college system does have more support for digital accessibility than I think UC Riverside has.
Okay.
I know that like Israel Fuentes from UC Riverside, he's pretty good on it. As well as here, I could actually send you some information about your person who you should talk to at your campus around digital accessibility. And that person will be able to consult with you on how to interpret the policy, as well as what the standard is between the institutions. And in the end, you could get the ADA or the legal involved, which I probably wouldn't advise. But if you want to get real serious, you could pull in the legal perspective. But but I would say that was the last resort. Talk to your accessibility office, talk to your students with disabilities office, as well as the representative within what's called the EAC within UCLA, which is our communal kind of think tank around digital accessibility. And I'll send that. I'll link that in the chat right now for you, for everyone actually, which is the local offices for the EAC. This membership will for those of you who are within the UC system, you could use this as a resource for people who are experts on your home campus on digital accessibility, and they will talk to you the way I just talked to you about digital accessibility, and they'll give you guidance.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're just about at time. So I just wanted to say thank you to Travis, Carolanne, and Sal for joining us today and giving us a comprehensive view about why caring about accessibility is important, and just some basic things and principles to follow, and as well acknowledging that there are some things that are quite sophisticated that will require accommodation at this point, but just in the spirit of being as accessible as possible. We appreciate everybody's attendance here today to take this very seriously, and also again for very good reasons approach the development of materials with this lens of being as inclusive as possible. So thank you. We'll and thank you for sharing your emails for follow-up questions. We'll again post this up on our webpage, and you may forward it to other colleagues that you think are interested in learning some of the basics.
And I've linked the presentation as well. So if you guys want to refresh yourselves with the presentation, go ahead and you can link there as well. And I know this is recorded, so feel free to post it wherever California Labs posts.
Okay, great. And we'll actually take the links off of here and email them in a separate email as well, so people have it for their convenience. Thanks, everybody, and have a great afternoon.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.